Chemical weapons, understandably, hold a special place of horror in the public imagination. Having your eyes burned out of your sockets or your lungs filled with fluids fill us with images of dread and terror that are somehow worse than the normal course of warfare. And so, the international community was shocked when it heard reports that chemical weapons were being used in Syria. The Boston Globe of March 27th reports that on Tuesday, March 19th, a missile attack killed at least 26 people, and the rebels are claiming that the government had used this against them with chemical weapons. The government has, of course, denied the report, and no concrete evidence has come down. But nevertheless, this incident leads us to today's question. Can opposition forces topple the Syrian government without spurring chemical weapon attacks? And fortunately, the answer seems to be yes. We can see why this is true by looking through three main points. First, Syria's chemical weapon attacks would draw international criticism. Second, the strife in Syria has been gaining increasing international appearance. And third, the rebels are actually making progress. But first, chemical weapon use by the government against the rebels would prompt drastic international response. To see this, we can first look to Al Jazeera on March 21st, in which the UN head of chemistry has decided to launch a mission into Syria to determine if this missile strike was in fact a use of chemical weapons. The UN has pulled out most of their aid efforts in the past, and the inspector has admitted that this mission will be incredibly difficult, having to navigate through war zones, risking his life. What this shows is that the UN takes any sort of idea of chemical weapons very seriously. They would not risk sending in an inspector if they didn't think that even a hint of chemical weapon use was something to be looked at. Further, we can look to The Guardian of March 19th, which reports that Obama has repeatedly stated that the US policy on the war in Syria is not intervention at the moment, but if chemical weapons were used, direct intervention would be thrown onto the table immediately. The US policy so far has been trying to stay away, but there's only so far you can watch a humanitarian crisis go before having to take action. What we can see is that even though there was just a rumor of a chemical attack a few weeks ago, there has been drastic international response, with the UN launching an investigation. If there was concrete evidence or widespread use of chemical weapon use, the response would be even greater. The US might even go in on its promise of direct intervention. Syrian government could not handle this at all. The US military would crush them. So it is in their best interest not to use chemical weapons against the rebels. But second, we can see that the struggle in Syria has been drawing increasing international attention. According to The Economist of March 26th, the Syrian opposition group has just joined the Arab League. Not the Syrian government, which was kicked out a long time ago, but the Syrian rebels are now a part of the Arab coalition. What this means is that the countries around Syria are gaining increasing sympathy for the rebels. They have always wanted the trouble solved somehow, but now they are taking a stance and picking the underdog to help. Additionally, we can look to the New York Times of March 28th, in which it states that the UN had to physically stop Turkey from deporting hundreds of Syrian refugees back across the border. What this indicates is that the war in Syria is no longer just a war in Syria. It is drastically affecting the neighbors in the entire region, and soon they will want a response. I don't know what form this response will be in. Currently, the Arab League is just helping to fund the Syrian rebels. But any sort of response would push this towards a resolution, and since the international community has almost unanimously lined up behind the rebels rather than the government, a push of international response would undoubtedly help the rebels topple the government. The war in Syria is, in fact, affecting the international community in such a way that it's aiming for success for the rebels. As stated above, chemical weapon use would prompt an even greater international response, and since we're already seeing an international response, the government is going to try to avoid this at all possible costs. So finally, we can look to the fact that the rebels are actually making fairly significant progress. According to the BBC of March 16th, fighting has recently intensified near Damascus in the recent weeks. This is not a sign of a rebellion that has been beating down. This is not a sign of a rebellion that's going to die after 2 years. They are fighting for control of the capital right now, 2 years after declaring war on the government. This is the sign of a rebel group who can accomplish its goals. And they have international help already. According to NPR on March 24th, with help from the CIA, neighboring Arab countries have in recent months begun escalating their gun shipments to the Syrian rebels. There has always been a steady flow from the Arab countries and discreetly from the CIA. But more recently, the CIA has publicly admitted to helping ferry guns to the rebels, and the Arab League is trying to push this number up. Additionally, we can look to the Boston Globe again on March 25th, in which it states that although Americans and citizens in the UK don't want more help for Syrian rebels, many other countries, including most of the EU, want the embargo lifted on Syria so more guns can make their way to the rebels. What all of this points to is that the rebels are kind of nearing their goal. This is answering the first half of the question, can the rebels topple the government? We've already seen that the government won't use chemical weapons, and it's now looking that the rebels may actually have a chance to topple the government. If the government uses chemical weapons, or just doesn't play their card right, international support will only increase for the rebels, and they will win. Today we examined the quotation, can opposition forces topple the Syrian government without spurring chemical weapon attacks? And we saw that hopefully the answer is yes. Even the rumor of a chemical weapon attack sent off massive international response, so steady attacks would bring a huge wave of response. Second, the strife is gaining increasing international attention.